Hi, everybody. I'm Bobby Haber here in New York City with my partner, Joanna Abbott Green. And it's my pleasure to welcome everybody to Mondo's 8th episode of our conversation series, Navigating the Future of the Independent Venue. I hope everybody's doing as well as possible in these extraordinarily difficult times. Firstly, as I'm always honored to do, I want to recognize and thank all frontline responders and their families, among whom are in fact represented with our speakers today. With our Mondo conversations, I hope we've been able to offer some moments of insight, answer some questions, and enjoy some amazing music together. We thank so many members of our community for offering their time to being part of our series. I hope to see all of you in person or virtually at Mondo in NYC in October. Now, onto our incredible panel. I'd like to welcome our moderator, Jen Sellers-Dimitrov. With over a decade of live music and event experience, Jen Sellers-Dimitrov is Vice President of Operations and Booking with CEG Presents, a New York City-based independent concert promoter. Jen works with venues throughout the Northeast. She develops artists and she markets their shows. In addition, we're very, very proud to have Jen as a showcase director for Mondo.NYC, and she'll be back for her second year this year. So without further ado, Jen, it's all yours.
Hi everyone, welcome. I'm really happy to be here today and connect you with some of these amazing panelists. I hope to have a really fun and engaging discussion today about the future of the independent venue, but the future of the live music industry. I think that we have a lot of great topics to discuss, and I want to make sure that each of you know that we are taking questions at the end. So we have some that were prepared that were sent in previously, but feel free to use the chat. We'll be monitoring it and checking back. And at the end, we'll take questions followed by a performance by Jordan Anderson. So let's get to it. I'm going to just start talking, introducing you to each of the panelists. Each of them will go first and talk about themselves, because I would like for each of you to get a sense of each other's personalities. So let's start with Leigh, our wonderful marketing and ticketing director over at Tractor Tavern in Seattle. Leigh and I have known each other for a few years now, and she's wonderful. I'm so happy to have her here. So Leigh, do you want to just introduce yourself to everyone?
Everybody, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be a part of this. As Jen said, I work at the Tractor Tavern in Seattle. It's a 400 capacity room that's been there for 25 years. So it's weathered quite a few things, but nothing like this. One of the things that we did when this first happened was we got all of our venue owners on an email chain, and we started to try to talk about what we could do to respond to this crisis, and that led to the formation of the Washington Music Nightlife Association, or WANMA. So we were one of the first organizations to kind of get together, and we've been very excited to work on a lot of initiatives.
Very good. And I'd like to introduce you to Chris Perella, who's with Ardmore in Philly.
Thanks, Jen. Appreciate it. Yeah, appreciate you inviting me to be a part of this, and I'm happy to share any nuggets of wisdom that would be helpful. But I'm Philly-based, and my home base is the Ardmore Music Hall, 600 cap club just outside the city on the main line. My team and I are kind of involved in a bunch of different projects spanning the industry. We're partners in 118 North and Ripplewood, which are both food and beverage focused concepts, but with some live entertainment. My team handles some booking and marketing for Milk Boy and Underground Arts in the city. We co-manage Everyone Orchestra. So, have gotten to see the sort of mayhem of the COVID disaster unfolding from a few different perspectives. And I'd say one silver lining just across the board has been the general kind of cooperation and hunkering down of everybody, for the most part, that I've dealt with in every respect: promoters, venue owners, agents, artists directly. I think everybody's had a really good understanding of the fact that we're all in it together, and that there's no playbook for what we're navigating. And that has definitely brought some comfort from the artist side, from the club side, from the ownership side, just knowing that we're going to all figure this stuff out together as best we can.
Thank you, Chris. And Stu, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Stu. I am with Howlin' Wolf in New Orleans. We are technically a 1,200 capacity venue, but we can go anywhere from 150 to 250 to 400. So we experienced all different types of events in different capacities. We also have an artist management company. Our bands have played at a lot of these venues here. Rebirth Brass Band, Naughty Professor, Big Sam's Funky Nation, Mike Dillon, some of the Revivalist side project stuff. Also have a production company. So our hands are in, all kinds of different things. We almost immediately as things were getting shut down here, we partnered with the New Orleans Musicians Clinic, which, if you guys aren't familiar, is one of the only clinics in the world that is strictly based upon providing free healthcare to musicians and entertainers. So not only are we raising funds for them, we're giving away free meals to musicians and service industry and hospitality workers 3 days a week. We're now expanded that program to offering delivery service to patients within the clinic that are either elderly or can't drive or don't have transportation. So now we've got about 60 to 75 people that we're delivering to once a week so far. So, our hands have been pretty tied in that realm, and, grateful just to have something to kind of, just do and stay occupied. So it's been rewarding to see everyone really come to the table between the financial donations and the food donations. And I don't even know how much weight I've gained in the past 6 weeks just from all the from the the butter chicken and the pizza and the fried chicken from Gus's that we've been given. So that's us.
Amazing, thank you. And Reverend Moose, can you talk about what you're involved with?
Hi, I'm Moose. I am the managing partner at Marauder and the executive director at NEVA. NEVA is the National Independent Venue Association that was launched about 3.5 weeks ago or so. The organization, which in many ways came out of Independent Venue Week, which my company runs throughout the U.S., is about 1,150 or so venues and promoters across the U.S. We are taking the fight straight to D.C. and Capitol Hill and trying to get consideration in upcoming legislation that would help sustain the future of independent venues across the country. The programs that are currently in place, especially the PPP plan that's there, it just doesn't suit the needs of most venues, and we're trying to get some type of guidelines as far as reopening policies go and financial assistance to be able to meet those reopening policies. We are moving pretty quickly. It's been pretty intense to be able to see an army this big assemble so quickly. I know Leigh can relate just through what's happened in WANMA, and they've been quite literally on the front lines of this. And it's great to be here today, so thank you.
Thank you again. And I'd like to reference each of those, NEVA and Washington Music Nightlife and all of us later on at the end. But let's first start with sort of the moment that our city decided to cut down mass gatherings. Because for me as promoter, I have shows in many different venues, and there's a lot of kind of waiting by the news announcements minute by minute, and to the point where it went from our city stating that we can have mass gatherings of 500, 100, 50, and then none sort of within a 48-hour period. So all of a sudden, all of these shows, all of these ticketed shows we have are silenced for the moment. So I wanted to talk about what each of you did, sort of the first sort of initial thoughts that went through your brain as to what do we do next. I mean, each of you run and operate a facility with large amounts of staff, and you're connected with managers, agents, bands. What were some of your first thoughts and some of your first phone calls? Whoever wants to take it first, maybe Stu or Chris.
Our first thoughts were, what the hell is going to happen to Jazz Fest? Jazz Fest for us and for most people in the city is a huge economic windfall that, it essentially covers your costs for all the slow summer months. So without having that, there's a huge question mark as to, what are people are going to do? Luckily for us, we kind of have a different model with our staff, where most of our staff work under us as a side gig. Most people have other jobs, so this is just sort of a supplementary income type situation. So there really only a small handful of us that are considered salaried full time. But we immediately canceled a bunch of shows, and as crazy as like a lot of those shows we canceled and rescheduled are now getting canceled again. I don't think any of us thought this situation would be going on this long, especially with information that was coming out in the beginning. So we immediately jumped into action, knowing that we were one of the only music clubs in town that had a kitchen. So we have, just so everyone understands, we have the Hall and Wolf, but we also have what we call the Den, which is a separate bar, kitchen, small 150 capacity performance space next door. So we immediately decided we're gonna feed people, and then as soon as we connected with the musicians clinic, like I was talking about earlier, it was just game on. We got shut down March 18th, and March 23rd was the first day we were serving meals. So that was a big thing for us, and it's definitely a New Orleans thing, where we hold our musicians in a very high esteem. And for us to just have that little impact to make sure people are fed was definitely a direction we were happy to go into immediately.
Very good. And Chris?
Yeah, and hi, Stu.
What's up, buddy?
I guess the first sort of thought that I remember having was that we weren't going to be trailblazers on any of this, because things unfolded and fell apart so quickly and changed so much moment to moment and day to day, that I thought it became quickly apparent that there was no amazing chart for us, or course for us to chart, because ultimately things were very clearly going with the tide, and that they were changing in really big shifts day to day that week of March 8th or whatever it was. And so I think we just started consuming information, like all of us probably, as much as humanly possible, and just making phone calls to our partners and management team and agents for shows that week and the following week, and just keeping in touch with everyone and getting as much information as possible. On the staff side, we're sort of the inverse of what Stu just described, because so much of what we do as a team in the Philly region has been built in and around the Ardmore Music Hall, and we haven't really taken a sensible step toward a more kind of consolidated umbrella, CEG presents type of scenario. And so there was a lot of responsibility immediately on myself and my partners at the music hall, who do have a number of people, both salaried and hourly, who rely on Ardmore and our other projects as their primary income. So, we spent a lot of time just immediately trying to inform ourselves on the programs that were being developed and the unemployment guidelines and guidance that we could offer, to whatever extent. Set up a GoFundMe shortly thereafter, and spent a lot of time just thinking through how we could drive dollars in that direction in a tasteful way, and how we could offer our help as the employers for the rest of March and beyond. And so it was a lot of kind of war room style, just long conversations about general philosophy and strategy and how we can help our people sustain. And then to Stu's point, I think that notion that I mentioned earlier of the general sense of cooperation that we felt pretty quickly, I think led me and my team quickly to a place of acceptance that we were going to be doing a lot of things that we would probably have to do all over again. And to know that and still do it is a really difficult thing it's a difficult pill to swallow. But it felt like from the start, we would be better off having things ready to go in June if we can give ourselves and our people some revenue, some dollars in their pockets, as opposed to, best case scenario and everybody reopens May 15th and we don't have anything on the books for 3 months. So that, that was kind of the direction we committed to from the start and are still there. We're still reworking shows from June and July into September, October, November, knowing full well that we may not have any meaningful tours in 2020. So that's been tough, but I'm grateful for that level of cooperation. It makes it feel like it's not quite as insane as it otherwise might feel.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. For in my experience, and I'm sure for all of you, having phone calls with our agents and bands and management, I mean, everyone has just sort of really been kind and fair, I find, and everyone's just kind of taking each other's lead. I have shows on the books for sure that I'm pretty confident will not happen, but I'd rather keep that and look at the future and redefine what that future looks like, and just keep that relationship just forward and connecting, like you said, Chris. I think it's important to just make sure we're talking to each other and seeing what works for one another. So with that, I want to talk about sort of our messaging, right? So we have what goes on internally and sort of what we're going to be talking about moving forward. But Leigh, I want to ask you, what sort of messaging have you been putting out there, social media wise, in terms of people purchasing tickets and ticket buyers? Are you connecting with them sort of immediately and keeping them in the know, or is it just my show's postponed and we'll be in touch as soon as possible? We're working things out.
Yeah, it's been hard on the social media side to know what and how to promote shows at this point, just because we don't know. Our dates keep getting extended like everyone else's. Seattle is one of the cities targeted to begin the reopening process, which is exciting and also a little scary. So we'll probably be opening close, sooner than others, but the communication in the interim is just, thank you for everything that you've done to support the Tractor and live music venues and the artists. We came out with a GoFundMe for our staff right away that got fully fulfilled. It's just really been showcasing what the artists are doing, their live streaming shows, just keeping that kind of sense of community going. Local artists came in and painted our boards because we boarded up, and sharing that has been a real source of inspiration to people, and just really kind of checking in every now and again to let them know that we're still here and we miss them. That's really what that's been on the Tractor side. And then on the WANMA side, because I do their socials as well, it's really about letting people know what they can do to help, which is in a big way contacting their state, local representatives to let them know how important live music is to them. And we've made a lot of noise in Washington, and today there's a big initiative across the country. So
that's us. We did that. Save Our Stages that launched today.
Yeah.
We're pretty excited about that. We went with every single one of our member venues, asking them to message their users and their email lists to reach out and connect with their representatives. It's saveourstages.com, and we're using the Save Our Stages hashtag. It was trending a bit earlier today, and we're pretty excited about that. We've gotten an insane amount of support. I think that one thing that's come out of this that it's easy for everybody on this call to kind of lose sight of in the day-to-day operations is how much support there is locally to be able to keep venues operable, and how important they are to the local community and the local economy. And when we brought Independent Venue Week to the States a few years ago, it felt like it felt really easy in many ways, because it wasn't a tough sell. It was like, okay, we're supporting venues across the country, and here's why they're important. Everyone's like, yeah, of course, I love that place. I'm happy to support. And now that there's this absolute abnormality to the market, and everyone is dealing with the future of every business, I think they're able to see which ones fit what role. And it's, venues are important to the local community from an economic point of view, but from a personal perspective, this is where people meet their significant others. It's where they bring their kids for their first shows. It's where they hire it out and have their weddings. You know, like there's so many memories that are made in these rooms, and I think that they show a certain level of importance to these individuals on a level that we sometimes are able to overlook.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think community has had a very strong impact from all of us. I've received so much amazing feedback from just support for just the musicians that we are working with to the venues that we're working with. So I'm really happy to hear that we're all connecting and we're all talking about what's going on, which Moose, I know you started to bring up, but I'd like for you to talk more about NEVA and sort of what are your initial immediate goals right now. And some suggestions to the team and our viewers as to what we can do to help.
Well, I'll answer that backwards. I think that the easiest thing that can be done to help right now is to be able to call your representative and tell them exactly how important these venues are. And that might seem like a half step, but the reality of it is what we're fighting for is we're fighting for legislation that will protect these venues in a way that is specific to them, as the current programs, the SBA programs, just don't apply. And there's a number of different reasons as to why that might be, but the reality of it is we need this legislative consideration. So the most helpful thing you can do is to call up your senator, your Congress, your representative, and say, this is why these venues are important. Please consider this as you're passing future laws. And you can go to saveourstages.com, and that'll push you through to the easy plug and play systems if you don't want to go through all that trouble. And it does mean something, and it means a lot. You know, what we're really trying to be able to do with all of our energy and all the support that we've gotten so far is take this letter that's been submitted to the Big Four in Congress, and that letter essentially outlines all of our demands on a more detailed level. The most obvious of which is the fact that the PPP plan just doesn't adequately benefit the venues because of how payrolls are structured, what the repayment plans are for this. The fact that venues are not going to be at full operation for quite some time. Some of these estimates are the end of next year. And the repayment programs that are in place for this just don't have that concession. So I don't think anything that we're asking for is significantly self-serving, as much as it just wasn't taken into consideration with the way the original legislation was passed. And so as CARES 4 is being written, we're trying to get more of this consideration into the laws and into the programs that are being put forth. That is truly the most helpful thing that anybody can do right now, is to call their representative, their local representatives, their senators, their Congress people, whatever it is that you can do right now. That's what needs to be done.
Okay,
and the more personal you can make those calls. Oh, sorry.
Actually, I was referencing.
The more personal you can make those calls and letters. Yeah. The more personal you can make those calls and letters, the more of an impact it has. We've made a lot of inroads with our King County, or that's the county in Seattle. That's one of the first government agencies that is looking at getting some funding to venues, independent venues. And we did a campaign with them where we were asking our people to write all of the King County counselors. They've never received so many emails and calls on any initiative than anything else that they've ever done. So we've made a huge impact on that. And there were emails that they were sharing around to each other and talking about during their meetings that were heartfelt and really detailed what the impact was on that individual and what it looked like for their community. Those were the things that were making a huge impact on them and taking our asks more seriously.
I love that. Yeah, I think that when you use your voice and you speak from the heart, it means so much more. So that's really great. A really great suggestion. So let's kind of just establish where we're at now. So, our venues are closed. We're thinking about our future financially, specifically, and how we can survive. And we're connecting with our community, which is super important, whether it's, through the artists directly or through your local community. and we're getting things going. You know, we're connecting with our senators. We're making some strong initiatives, and we're making our voice louder and louder, which I think is definitely the priority. And but then there's your day to day, right? So there's you in your apartment quarantined, and you're, you know, missing music, and you're missing your ability to go out in public and connect with live music goers, and the potential of meeting your future significant other, you know, as Moose points out. So what are you all doing with in relation to the artists that you're working with? I know actually I want to bring Chris into this, because he was just involved with something pretty amazing this past weekend. So if you want to talk about your our more hosted
Yeah.
streaming. Yeah.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, we're trying our best to just keep on top of what is evolving as the current means of people, you know, pursuing new content, and we want to be involved to whatever extent it will put some dollars in artists and staff pockets. And so the event this past weekend was called Love from Philly, and it was it ended up being a pretty large scale. You know, Kurt Vile, War on Drugs, G Love, John Oates, Mark and Aaron from the Disco Biscuits, and they just had tapped into all sorts of Philly musicians who are stuck at home and had them either pre-record or go live with a couple of songs from home. Some people did collaborative songs similar to the Stones on the whatever the worldwide stream was, or the Roots with Jimmy Fallon and Sting doing the Police song. You know, they sort of built pre-recorded songs one person at a time that turned out really beautiful and really creative and interesting. And this particular stream was built to put money toward micro grants for Philly area concert and entertainment industry people. So you know, it's all of those people, but it's also Philly orchestra musicians, and you know, there's just so many people that are affected by this, apart from the handful of touring bands that, you know. It's thousands of people behind the scenes. So anyway, raised, sounds like close to $100,000 for the weekend, which is going to go 100% to micro grants for people, including my staff, the artists that I brought in, that, you know, during my curated hour, and a lot of the other artists that participated the whole weekend. So obviously there is a technological opportunity to do that kind of stuff. There's a hunger among people who need it in our industry, and there's definitely, you know, as all of these guys have pointed out, there's a real desire to support us and what we do and how we do it, and the artists that we work with. So I'm hoping that there's more of that to come. I don't know what it looks like, and I imagine, like rebroadcasted streams, it's going to become oversaturated quickly, but the hope is to find ways to channel some of that artistic creativity into both the hands of consumers and you know, to do so in a way that develops a revenue stream for both parties. And whether that's creating content similar to the stream this past weekend with donations and or pay-per-view, whether it's ultimately doing safe audience-free streams out of our venue, although we have the luxury of permanent cameras with nugs.net, so that makes it an easier plug and play. But you know, that's something I know other venues that do not already have that are currently pursuing, because that may be part of our interim plan as independent venues, is get, you know, some of the best players in and around Philly to come in here and use our stage, create some new shows, which people are you know, have a hunger for. And even though we can't necessarily gather with that community as soon as we would like, I think that's still a step in the right direction. So we're going to certainly pursue that as soon as artists and crew alike feel that it's safe to do so. And we're going to keep listening to what, you know, people like Moose and Leigh and Stu and other people in the country are doing to support their teams and the artists that we work with, because this needs to be sustainable for all of them, for us to be okay, whether it's 6 months from now or 18 months from now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a very good point, and I know that a lot of questions were that were asked to the panel are really directly related to streaming and revenue streams. And I know that, you know, a lot of the streams I've seen, it's been mostly, you know, donation based directly to the artist, which I think at this point, a lot of venues or organizations, is kind of what they can do. But if anyone wants to speak to the point of something larger, I know isn't nugs.net also subscription based, and I think that There are others out there that are like basically pay-per-view. But is there anyone that has a comment on this?
Well, just to quickly add, and then if any of you guys want to jump in, I think right now it's a new frontier and everybody's experimenting with everything. So there's subscription models, including Live from Out There, which is a management team that we work with often, and they put together this amazing subscription model, and they've generated quite a bit of revenue for the artists. There's free streams, which we're doing a lot of with Nugs because we've done all these free streams in the past. We've got archival footage, and we're just rebroadcasting it, sort of repackaged for a designated time, but it's a concert that already happened, and we put up a Venmo link to the artists and a GoFundMe link for our staff. And if we raise a couple $100 for each side, consider that a win right now. And then I think there's ultimately some kind of a hybrid version where there could be either straightforward pay-per-view streams, or there could be limited capacity concerts with a supplemental pay-per-view stream. So I think it's somewhat uncharted territory, and obviously Nugs.net have been a great partner in all this because this is what they did before the rest of the industry collapsed. But there's obviously new people and new platforms that are dipping their toes in, and you're seeing a lot of different packages and presentations of that. I think people will keep getting creative, and I think that it's our responsibility, in spite of the fact that I'd much rather be in person for a show, I need to be aware enough of these developments to, apply them in whatever way I can to be supportive of our community.
Absolutely. I am just reminded that we are at 5, so we've been on for 30 minutes, and I would like to just reintroduce the panelists here. We have Chris, who was just speaking from Ardmore Music Hall in Philly. We have Moose over here, who is from Marauder and Neva. Stu is Helen Wolf from New Orleans, and we have Leigh over from the Tractor Tavern in Seattle. Stu, can we jump around a little and talk a little bit more about the New Orleans Musician Clinic and what you're doing specifically for them 3 days a week?
So we are giving away free meals to musicians, service industry, hospitality workers, first responders every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Again, it started as a way for the Musicians Clinic to basically have an excuse to reach out to their base. Not only reach out to their base, but to kind of make sure we're spreading a widespread message to the community that, hey, this exists. And I know you're freaking out as a musician right now going, what am I going to do, to pay my bills, but what are you going to do if you get sick? And this is why the clinic exists. They have programs available, they have insurance, they have ways of getting you treatment. So, when we started that 6 weeks ago, that was sort of the impetus of doing so. And, now it's really evolved into, the 3 days a week are almost like a minor thing now, considering we're getting so many food donations that we're actually giving food to other organizations that are doing similar things. We've expanded to delivery 1 day a week to patients that can't, travel, or to elderly to drive a car. And then, there's a fundraising aspect of it where, between a GoFundMe and some grants that have come out of nowhere, we just rolled out these limited edition Jazz Fest style tie-dye shirts that are all going towards the clinic too. So I think we've raised somewhere close to 20 grand so far that'll go to the clinic to keep them going. And we're not the only ones doing that. We're kind of just a cog in the machine at this point, but we're really one of the only cogs that's specifically worried about the musicians.
Okay. I think that there's so many venues doing such amazing things. I'm wondering, Moose, if you can make if you've noticed of any venues or organizations that are kind of stand out with what they're presenting currently.
Yeah, I mean, Howlin' Wolf is what I guess doing probably one of the best jobs in the country as far as being able to serve their community in a very real way. And so kudos to you guys down there for being able to do such a thing. There's aside from the entertainment factor, which, like Chris said, it is the Wild West, and it is the new frontier, and there's people coming up with new methods to be able to do it, whether it's local artists that are coming in to support, or the venues themselves trying to orchestrate something special for them. I think what I've seen come out of this is we always talk about these venues as being like the anchors of their communities. And what we're seeing now is that why they function like that. So when you have Howlin' Wolf in New Orleans, or Josh Baker, who runs, my old Kentucky blog and Hi-Fi in Indianapolis, and they spent weeks, receiving PPE and materials that people could donate. And then you have the entire Seattle community coming together, and there's a heartbreaking series that Steven Severin from Numos has been doing on Billboard for the last few weeks. It's just a weekly check-in, and it just will bring tears to your eye to be able to read it. I think that there's two things that are happening simultaneously. One is there's that connection to be that reason to keep that connection going with the audience, whether it's we're here as entertainers, or whether it's here we're here because we need your help. And then the other side of that is the organizational aspect, which everyone on this call has experienced in one way or another. It's such a competitive environment. Everything in entertainment is competitive, and everything in business is competitive. And now you have both of them in one small space, and you have communities that are organizing and coming together in ways that they would otherwise maybe not necessarily have done in such a natural way. So to more directly answer your question, as far as creative streams, we've seen everything from Jimmy Eat World was broadcasting live from the Rebel Lounge in Arizona for the first week or two that this was happening. And there are some venues that just aren't legally allowed. Staff isn't even legally allowed in. We've had talks with folks as these occupancy restrictions were to loosen up, whether it means that there's going to be a combination of both live performances and stream performances. I think that's going to become the norm. I think that's going to be pretty accepted, and that the users are going to adapt to that pretty well. There's no substitution whatsoever by any means, but at least being able to give people an option. And we've seen that just in the digital age, just an entire generation that's come up and had access to things that the generation before them would never have been able to experience. And so there's certainly a learning curve that we're all forced into right now. But the other side of this is going to be pretty interesting to see what it looks like as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of really good suggestions, and I'm just looking over some of the chat here, and there's a lot going on. So I think that you should all take a look at the discussions happening here. What it looks like when we reopen. I mean, we don't know when that's going to happen, and we don't know what it's going to look like as far as limiting the capacity of the venues. And we were just talking before the panel that there's a venue in Arkansas that's opening up. It was a little bit over 1,000 capacity seated space that's selling about 290 tickets. They have special notification of what they're allowing into how many they're allowing into the bathroom, how many people will be seated next to one another. That's just a reality that we're all going to be faced with at any given point when we're able to reopen at whatever capacity we will. And as Moose pointed out, we're very resilient. We're going to figure out how to do this. It's just going to be step by step and moment to moment. And whether it's starting with just streaming and then the merge into partially streaming and live events, that's maybe phase 2. And from there, it's also just opening up other opportunities and getting creative. There was a question posed by a woman who's suggesting or making the question, if we just have a simple intimate 20-person capacity show that's just super expensive. I mean, sure, that's definitely an option if the artist is amenable to that, if that's how they'd like to pursue that live show. But then you also have to consider what the touring industry is going to look like. I think little by little we'll have local artists start performing in our venues, and we'll be able to showcase artists obviously in the region, but what does touring look like, and how far will a band go if they can only sell at 25% capacity? So, there's really a lot of unknowns. And I think that it's going to come down to the point where you have to just decide if this is the show that you're going to do and how you're going to connect with your fans, if that's the way you want to connect with them, and it will just slowly unfold. It's hard to say that there's any sort of answer, but we're all going to figure this out as it goes, and we'll probably, the stark truth is we'll probably lose some venues, and there'll be companies that close and downsize, and hopefully the positive is that we're joining forces, and there'll be a lot more people connecting on a real level. And I can say for sure that everyone I've spoken to since we've essentially shut down has been, when you're ready, I'm ready, which I love that attitude. That's how the new things develop. So I'm hoping to leave this on a very positive note overall, but I think there's an unknown, and that's just what we're all facing. But connecting with each other is, I think, priority, and discussing the elements of what makes this industry great and what problems we have. We should absolutely discuss the problems. This is the time to reset, right? This is the time where we're able to shut down and think clearly, maybe, about what you're actually doing.
Yeah, do you mind if I just comment on that? Because I think that one thing we've seen is we have a number of communities that are usually taken for granted, that are banding together, and they're not necessarily it's like it's a shared superpower of not normally having too much power, right? So you have these venues that are incredibly vulnerable, artists that whose revenue streams have been drastically affected, and oftentimes I think that the involvement that is happening, whether it's through social media posts or an artist performing online on their behalf, or whatever the case might be, I think it's important to acknowledge that there's not a lot of the revenue models are disrupted, right? So the things that are happening right now are happening out of the kindness of people's hearts, and they're happening to be able to create awareness and to be able to hopefully draw more attention and community around it. And I realize that there's a certain value of exposure where that gets capped at a certain point. But right now, I think that what we're seeing is the community come together, and it's a sign of the importance of the relationships between the venues and the artists, that we're seeing such support across the board.
Absolutely. Let's see. I want to take a few more questions. I have their screen up here, but let's see. Yeah, so some people talk about whether or not people will actually even come out when we're able to reopen, right? So will there be a lot of fears of getting sick, and what will venues need to do to ensure that their customers are safe? Chris and Stu specifically, if you have any comments on what you realistically, even if we're able to sell full capacity or 25 capacity, we do need to consider, what those elements will be.
Yeah, that's a constant topic of conversation. I am grateful for things like NIVA and some of the things that are happening down here, where I do think there is going to be sort of a across the board platform that says this is how we're going to move forward in making sure people are safe, and sort of tailor it specifically to how the situation that's happening in your market. We're going to do everything we can to keep people safe. That's honestly that's not the things that keep us up at night. I think we're all confident. We're all smart people here. We'll figure that part of it out. If I can be the guy that sort of pees in the punch bowl, the concern I think we have down here is that a lot of venues are going to have to make a very tough decision at some point over the next couple of months. Because the reality is, obviously all signs are pointing towards this model of ticketed versus, ticketed combined with streaming, and what is that revenue going to look like? How is that split between venues? Obviously with such scaled down capacity restrictions, what are your bar sales going to look like? Are you going to be able to sustain you know, are you gonna be able to pay your any type of bills with just that amount of money coming through? And sad truth is, for a lot of venues down here, I don't think it's gonna work. So, you know, I think, as Moose was saying earlier, really turning the attention towards making sure our representatives understand that, you know, especially down here in New Orleans, it's all signs point to music clubs being sort of the last places that open up. So we're in this for the long haul. And, you know, the other drum we've been beating that no one seems to want to talk about is what's going to happen on August 1st when that unemployment goes away.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, all of our local musicians who, you know, are staying afloat because of that, and, you know, other grants and, you know, different local sources of income that have come across. I mean, the Jazz and Heritage Foundation, you know, Jordan over there can probably attest to, have done a phenomenal work in getting musicians money and getting, you know, gig workers money. But what happens when that all runs out and we're still sitting here in what is, you know, the slowest month of the year with no tourism, still being under, you know, a restriction where we can only put 50 or 100 people in the room. So, you know, those are the tough questions, you know, and that's why NIVA exists. That's why, you know, all these people are banding together. So I fully 120% agree that the more our elected leaders understand what's going on, the better off we're all going to be.
Yeah, I think Stu is spot on and touched on a couple things that I was going to say. I agree 100% with the idea that how we handle reopening with limited capacity and sanitations and restrictions is not what keeps me up at night either. It's about how not just Ardmore Music Hall and my team, but the artists that we work with and the other venues that are in our ecosystem and throughout the country just survive to the point where that revenue can bounce back in a meaningful way, because I think it's clear to everyone that 25% capacity or anything close to it means nobody's going to be able to afford their livelihood, but it may make a dent. And I think that, you know, provides some hopefulness. And I agree with Stu, and I'm thankful for NIVA and everybody who's working toward those sort of guidelines for the music industry, as well as, you know, just officials making those sorts of guidelines on the national level. I think there's no real concern in my mind that if we can reopen at 25 capacity, there will be a demand there, because even if there's a percentage of people who simply will not go out, no matter what the guidelines say, you're already operating at an extremely diminished capacity. So I don't have any concern about filling a 25% room based on social fears, nor do I have concern about being able to keep people safe. I think the real concerns are, as Stu said, how do we survive? How do we make sure that the programs that are currently insufficient become either more robust or are tailored to certain industries? I think that's essential. And so the work that these guys are doing is critical. And I'm just going to, you know, follow Moose's lead on what the priorities are from that vantage point, because that's what we all need to be focused on. But I think Moose also touched on something earlier, and Jen, you have also, just on the sort of community level, one of my favorite resources in the sort of restaurant and bar world is A Great Good Place, book by a guy named Ray Oldenburg. And it is essentially just focused on how important what we do and the places that we run are for a local social ecosystem, because people have home and they have work and they desperately need a third place. And that's the place where they can gather and get creative. They can connect with new people. They can be themselves. They can have some drinks. They can relax. And it is an extremely important place and need for people that isn't going away. So there's a lot of people starting to sound the alarm on, you know, will things ever bounce back? Is this a permanent new normal, et cetera? I don't have any of those concerns, because I feel very confident that at a point where COVID-19 is under control, we will be back at full steam. And it may take some time and it may be a bumpy road. And again, the question is, will people survive to that point? But there's no doubt that the hunger for the kind of community that we all help drive, and that we, you know, all ourselves are a part of, isn't going anywhere. I think there's going to be more of a need for that than ever before. So I think that the future over the long haul is bright for the arts and entertainment industry, but we have to survive.
Thank you. Yeah, the artists are there's a lot of artists that are chiming in. both on the chat and just in the past. But I want to just mention that there are many of you that have managed that are managing artists right now, and I'm curious to know what advice you've been giving them. And before you start, I do want to mention that we do have a performer that's going to close out the night, whom Stu manages. So I don't know, Stu, you want to just talk a little bit about what Jordan Anderson has been doing, and touch upon some advice or suggestions that you've had with your other artists, and Chris with Everyone Orchestra. Leigh, I know that you're in touch with many musicians on a day-to-day, so if you'd like to chime in too.
I would say that the musicians are kind of in the same place we are. Everyone's sort of figuring it out. Some people just immediately jumped into the streaming game and hit the gas pedal and haven't let go. Other artists, that we work with are sort of taking their time and realizing, they're better suited getting into the game when they have a little more of a quality product. But again, this is a new frontier. There's no wrong answers. Rebirth specifically still has a bunch of dates on the books. Some might happen, some might not. And, I think there's definitely a whole side of this, and that Jen, you've sort of touched on, but how the touring game is gonna change. And even, Leigh, I think we can talk about this in real time, about how, Rebirth was scheduled at your spot.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, hey, we're 250. What are we going to do? Then it was, oh, wait, never mind. Let's reschedule to August. And I would imagine we're all feeling at this point, are we going to still do this in August? So, I think every band's different. And I think every band's approaching it differently. I mean, Mike Dillon, you got to go see what he's doing. It's pretty ridiculous. He's just got this whole, studio space of just nothing but percussion, and he's got these weird puppets that his girlfriend intermingles into the sets, and it's total Mike. But Naughty Professor, to connect Jordan to the situation, like Naughty Professor put out the Brady Bunch style video with a blank "Your Face Here" thing to allow other musicians to put a vocal or a horn into their song and become part of the video. Jordan was one of those people that did it, and it came out amazing. At that point, the guys are now talking about taking a snippet of that and turning it into a whole song featuring Jordan. Jordan doesn't know that yet, by the way, but we'll figure that out. So I just think everyone's being creative in their own way. And I think they're all sort of feeling the stress too. I mean, the reality is, I'm not going to name any band names, but Naughty Professor was on tour with one band that is trying to reschedule for later in the year, like their 21st hold, and on some of these venues. So, and this is a band that's been touring for 20 years that they're opening for. So it's like, really, I think everyone is realizing that most of these guys aren't touring till next year. And I think there is going to be a time where people start pivot towards the venues and using the venues as sort of a new backdrop to what they're doing. A lot of the local studios down here have stepped up and have created some really cool vibes in terms of their presentation. So, I think that's going to evolve because, the reality is where New Orleans is right now. I really don't see us doing anything effective in terms of doing ticketed shows for quite some time.
Chris, what about Everyone Orchestra? I mean, that's its own unique animal, though.
Well, it's sort of an existential crisis because we are all about improvisation, and it's a new cast of musicians every time. So there's already so much kind of baked in uncertainty to what we do, which is the good part about it. But now the layer of uncertainty that we're dealing with is, makes it interesting to just try to navigate how to stay relevant when we don't have a band identity. Matt Butler is an amazing leader of Everyone Orchestra, but what he does by nature is community driven. It brings people together. It brings musicians together who have literally never played a note together before they get on stage, and they create these amazing, fully improvised productions. how do you possibly replicate that in this time? And I think, it's beyond my sort of simple-minded comprehension whether there's a technology that can be developed where musicians can hear each other in real time and feed off of each other without a delay. Seems to me that if that existed, obviously people would be tapping into it. And so I don't know whether that's feasible, but in the meantime, Matt and I are at least having conversations about not only how do we continue to tell the story of Everyone Orchestra and share content and share ideas and creative energy that will hopefully lead to just a continued growing presence and ultimately ticket sales down the road. But I think we're also looking at ways that we can get creative in some of the scenarios that may present themselves, like limited capacity. And does it open up a situation where for the first time, Matt tours as Matt and he goes to each city and collects local musicians so that nobody's flying, nobody's traveling. It's, I saw somebody's comment in the chat that this could be a really bad thing for local musicians because there's a limited sort of bandwidth for programming. And so touring bands are going to dominate. I actually think it's quite the opposite. I think that markets who have strong talent in their market, that's going to be critical because there are people in and around Philly that if we can do 50 capacity shows, we may be able to bring in some premium talent if they don't have flights, they don't have a tour bus, et cetera. And so I think that from a sort of demand standpoint, local bands that can sell 50 tickets are going to be worth as much as touring bands who can sell 50 tickets. So I don't know. There's a lot of unknowns, but I think for Matt specifically, it's about thinking about how to take those elements of community and connectivity that Everyone Orchestra is completely rooted in and extend that to some new creative circumstances, whether it's a 1,000-person Zoom call or whether it's a 50-person tour, 50 capacity tour. We don't know the answers yet, but the conversations at least are interesting to have.
Mm-hmm. Leigh, do you want to add anything?
No, I think everything everybody's been saying has really covered it. I think our responsibility is to make sure that the staff and the artists and everybody is safe. So as we start to look at reopening, look at outdoor events, things like that, maybe during the summer, we just have to make sure that we're all taking care of each other. And I think the need will be there for people who want to experience live music. And I'm hoping that this is a great opportunity for some of the local artists who to get more prominence and more well-known within the cities, because that is going to be our base that we're going to be looking at to book shows when we get to start doing that.
Very good, Des. Thank you. Thank you everyone for chiming in and tuning in and speaking your minds and giving us advice and giving us questions and giving us things to think about. This is an open conversation that will continue. So Chris, Moose, Stu, and Leigh, thank you so much. And with that,
thank you.
I'd like to end the meeting with Jordan Anderson. Take it away.
Check 1, 2. I hope you guys can hear me. Hope you all are all staying strong, staying good out there. It was great to listen to all this. I really appreciate you having me. I'll do a song I wrote during the quarantine, and then a song that we have out. So check it out. This one's called Supernatural. Hey. I got you by my side. Got a flame. There's no need to explain. I'm gonna walk right up to you and hold your hand. Show you I'm a better man. No. Head up to the sky. Tell you no more lie. Miss outside. Supernatural. Baby, I'm with you. Oh, supernatural. Baby, I'm with you. Supernatural. Casual. Come on now. Again, thanks to Stu over in New Orleans for having us. Feeling free, there's nowhere I'd rather be. Out your praise, I don't need you for the rest of my days. Yeah. Gonna walk right up to you and hold your hand. Show you I'm a member. Hail up to the sky, tell you no more lies. Baby, dreaming, sounds high, yeah. Love supernatural. Baby, I'm with you around, yeah. Love supernatural. Baby, I'm with you, supernatural. So casual, come on now. Say yeah. Love supernatural. Baby, I'm with you now, time. Love supernatural. Baby, I'm with you. Love supernatural. Baby, I'm with you, yeah. Love supernatural. Baby, I'm with you, supernatural. So casual. Come on now. Oh, yeah, thank you. I got one more for you. Thank you for sticking around. Again, thanks to Stu. I'll see you soon. I'll probably see him, Stu, tomorrow. Thanks for having me.
Yes, you were, buddy.
This will be the last one. There he is. Hey, Stu. Thank you guys for having me. This one's called Don't Make Off With My Love. Very fitting for right now. Trouble around the corner. Trouble around the bend. If you can't find no Mary, never see her again. She's lying on the table, belly clean alive. I know she's really able to open her eyes to more of the better I said. All I want to be would do so well for me. You was a hole in the wall where we would fall in love. Where the battles in the door, I'm running out to you. No, give it all to you. But before I do, just ask you, said, don't make off my love. 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 Yeah. Trouble around the corner, trouble around the bend, and it melted when it said, I was your closest friend. Speak about a Mother Mary, see her again. This time alone, they're right. That's what he said. I'm just Texas man. She said, don't make up my love. 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 Thank y'all so much for having me. Thanks, Stu. I appreciate
Yeah, buddy.
you. Man. Have a great day. Thank you so much for. I really enjoyed the panel. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Jordan. Now, Bobby.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
What a wonderful, wonderful panel, and a lot learned, and obviously a lot of work to do. But we wish you all luck and success and safety and good health. And thank you for everybody sticking with us. And we will see you next Tuesday afternoon. Be safe, be healthy, be well. Bye-bye from New York.
Thanks. Talk to all of y'all soon.